This is my true story. I spent 50 years loving one woman, my wife, Margaret. She was my reason for every sunrise, my comfort in every storm. When she passed away, I thought life had ended with her. I buried her near our home in Charleston, South Carolina, and never looked back into that room again. But 10 years later, while cleaning the house for the first time, I lifted her pillow and found something folded beneath it, a note she had left before she died. I opened it, and what I read made my knees give way. Before I tell you what it said, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is. And please subscribe so my story reaches more hearts that still believe in love. It's been 10 long years since that night, but I still remember every sound, every breath, every heartbeat beside me. The doctors had said she didn't have much time left, but I refused to believe it. I thought love could bargain with fate. I sat by her side in our little house on the edge of Savannah, Georgia, holding her frail hand as the soft hum of the night drifted through the curtains. The street outside was quiet, even the cicadas seemed to pause, as if the world knew it was losing something sacred. Her eyes were tired but kind, full of that same warmth she'd carried since the first day I met her at the county fair 50 years ago. She smiled faintly, the kind of smile that hides pain behind grace, and told me to keep living, to find reasons to wake up, even when she couldn't. I nodded, but I didn't understand then what that promise would cost. That night, as the moonlight spilled across her face, she slipped away in her sleep while my hand still held hers. No goodbye. No sound. Just silence, the kind that never ends. The next morning, the sun rose the same as always, cruel in its normalcy. The world moved forward, but I didn't. I kept her side of the bed untouched. Her pillow stayed fluffed, her quilt folded the way she liked it, her slippers resting neatly by the dresser. People told me to pack her things away, to heal. But how do you heal from something that felt like breathing? Her perfume lingered faintly in the air, lilac and soap, and I'd catch myself turning around, expecting her to walk out of the kitchen humming like she always did. The house became a quiet monument, a place where time refused to pass. I couldn't sleep properly anymore. Every night, I'd wake to check if her blanket was still folded, if the lamp was still off, if maybe somehow I'd dreamed it all. There were moments when I thought I heard her voice, soft and distant, and I'd whisper back into the dark just to feel less alone. But no answer ever came, only the hollow sound of my own breath filling the room. For years, I lived that way, existing, not living. Every photograph became a reminder of what I'd lost. Every sunrise, a punishment. I'd walk through Forsyth Park some mornings, just to see people holding hands, the way we used to. Sometimes, I'd sit by the fountain and watch the water shimmer, thinking maybe she could see me there, sitting like a man who never learned how to move on. And yet, something in me still waited. Not for her return, I knew that was impossible, but for meaning. For a sign that she'd left something behind for me beyond memories and heartache. I never found one, or so I thought. The years rolled by like slow tides. Seasons changed, birthdays came and went, and still, her side of the bed remained untouched. Then, on the 10th anniversary of her passing, I decided to do something different. Maybe it was guilt, or maybe it was exhaustion from living in the past, but I told myself it was time to clean her things. Just once. Just enough to breathe again. The morning was calm, the same soft light pouring through the window. I started with her nightstand, the same lamp, the same clock frozen at 11:04 p.m. The time she took her last breath. Then I moved to her pillow. My hands shook as I lifted it, careful as though she still lay there. And that's when it happened. A small folded paper slipped out from underneath, yellowed with age, creased but perfectly preserved. My heart stopped. For a moment, I thought it was just an old receipt or note from years ago. But when I saw her handwriting, that neat, looping script I'd memorized from decades of birthday cards and grocery lists, I froze. The room spun, and I had to sit down. I hadn't seen that handwriting in 10 years. I traced the letters with trembling fingers before I even opened it. My name was written across the front. Just John. No date. No message. Just my name, like she had known I'd find it one day when I was ready, not before. I didn't open it then. I couldn't. The paper felt heavy in my hands, heavier than grief itself. I pressed it to my chest and closed my eyes, feeling as though her hand was once again over mine. 10 years of silence, 10 years of sorrow, and now she had spoken again, from beyond that endless quiet. After Margaret's death, the house fell into a kind of stillness that felt alive. It wasn't the peaceful quiet of rest. It was the heavy quiet of absence. Every sound I made seemed to echo off her memory. The kettle's whistle reminded me of her humming. The chair by the window creaked the same way it used to when she sat down to read. I tried to move on, but grief doesn't leave just because you ask it to. It lingers, quietly, like dust in the corners you never sweep. I stopped answering phone calls. Friends came for a while, bringing casseroles and advice, but slowly they drifted away. People always do when they don't know how to stand beside grief. I didn't blame them. I didn't want to talk anyway. I filled my days with routine. Feeding the birds in the morning, watching the sunset from the porch, walking to the same bench near Forsyth Park every Sunday. I told myself that if I just followed the same rhythm long enough, the ache would soften. It didn't. Her presence was everywhere. Her clothes still hung neatly in the closet, pressed, clean, untouched. I couldn't bring myself to box them up. Her shoes lined the floor perfectly, the smallest pair still dusted with sand from our last trip to Myrtle Beach. I left her favorite mug beside the sink, as if she might wander in one morning and ask for her usual black coffee. Even the scent of her lavender lotion clung to the air. Faint, but loyal. The last trace of her that time hadn't yet stolen. 10 winters passed this way. Birthdays came and went, anniversaries slipped by unnoticed, and the seasons changed like a film I wasn't really watching. I didn't celebrate holidays anymore. The decorations felt pointless without her laughter to fill the house. I remember one Christmas when I sat by the fireplace alone, staring at the empty armchair across from me. I had placed her knitted blanket over it, like a ghost still keeping warm. That was the night I realized grief doesn't fade with time. It just learns to sit beside you without asking for attention. I never remarried. People told me I should, that I was still young enough at 65 to find companionship. But love like ours doesn't get replaced. It gets carried. She wasn't gone. Not really. She was in every sunrise I couldn't enjoy. Every song I turned off halfway. Every quiet sigh that came without warning. My heart was still married, even if my house was empty. There were nights I'd wake up suddenly, thinking I felt her shift beside me in bed. I'd reach over and find the pillow cold, untouched, and my chest would ache so sharply it felt like a knife. Sometimes I would whisper her name just to hear how it sounded in the dark. I didn't expect an answer. I just needed the air to remember her too. I started writing letters I'd never send. Each one began with "Dear Margaret" and ended with the same line. "I hope you're still proud of me." I'd slip them into a small wooden box under my nightstand, the same one she gave me for our 10th anniversary. That box became my confession booth, my therapy, my only company. But still, I never touched her pillow. That side of the bed remained sacred, the last untouched piece of a life that used to feel whole. The neighbors grew older, their children moved away, and the town grew quieter. Even the trees outside our house seemed to age with me. Slower, sadder. I often thought about selling the house, starting fresh somewhere new, maybe out west in Arizona or near the coast in Maine. But every time I packed a suitcase, I'd glance at her photo on the dresser and stop. Leaving that house felt like leaving her again. And I couldn't do that twice in one lifetime. 10 years passed, and I lived like a ghost among the living polite smiles, polite words, but no real life inside them. The world outside kept spinning. But mine had stopped in that bedroom, the night she took her last breath. And though people said time heals, I knew the truth. Time doesn't heal. It only teaches you how to hide the wound better. Then came that morning, the one I never expected. The day I decided to finally clean her room. Not because I wanted to forget, but because I was afraid of being forgotten myself. I wanted to touch her things one last time before they faded completely. I didn't know it yet. But hidden beneath that untouched pillow was something that would pull me right back to her. Something that would remind me that love, even after death, still finds its way to speak. The morning I decided to clean the room felt strangely heavy, like the air itself was aware of what was about to happen. 10 years had passed since I'd last touched her side of the bed. The curtains were still the same white lace with little embroidered flowers she had chosen from a shop in Nashville, Tennessee, during one of our road trips. Sunlight slipped through them in the same golden stripes that once fell across her face while she read in the mornings. I began slowly, my hands trembling as though I were disturbing something sacred. I dusted the bookshelf, straightened her novels, wiped the framed photo of our wedding day, her smile beaming under the oak tree where we said our vows. Every item in that room told a story, and each one pulled a thread of memory loose. I could almost hear her laughter again, faint and echoing. The longer I stayed in that room, the more I felt her presence not haunting, but protective, as if she was watching to see if I was finally ready. When I reached the bed, I stopped. That bed had been my church of memory, my altar of grief. I had slept on the very edge for a decade, careful never to disturb her pillow. But that morning, something inside me shifted. Maybe it was the ache of missing her that had turned into courage. Or maybe it was the whisper of her voice I still heard in my dreams. I took a deep breath and lifted her pillow. Something small fluttered out and landed on the blanket. A folded piece of paper, yellowed slightly with age, delicate, like a pressed flower. My chest tightened immediately. I knew her handwriting before I even picked it up. My name John written in that same graceful curve she used when signing birthday cards and grocery lists. I froze. The world seemed to stop moving. For a few moments, I couldn't breathe. The sunlight hit the page just right, and it almost glowed. I picked it up with shaking hands, terrified that if I blinked, it would disappear. It felt like she had reached through time to touch me one last time. 10 years. 10 years. And she had been here all along, waiting beneath the one place I never dared to disturb. I sat on the edge of the bed, holding the note to my chest. I didn't open it. I couldn't. My heart pounded so hard, I could hear it echoing in my ears. What could she have written? A goodbye I had never heard? A confession? Or just a message meant to remind me that I wasn't as alone as I felt? I didn't know which possibility scared me more. I must have sat there for an hour. Maybe more. The morning light shifted across the floor, creeping toward the dresser. Outside, a bird called the same mockingbird that visited our window every spring. I looked at her photo on the nightstand, and for a moment, I felt like she was there, urging me to read it. But my fingers wouldn't move. It was as if the paper itself carried her heartbeat, and I was afraid that opening it would make her disappear all over again. I placed it gently beside me and ran my hand over the bedspread. Every stitch, every fold, every faint scent of lavender reminded me of her. My eyes blurred as I realized how much time I had spent preserving a room, when what she had truly wanted was for me to live. The note was proof she had planned for this, known me well enough to understand I'd never let go unless she gave me permission. The room felt different now. The stillness wasn't suffocating anymore, it was patient. I leaned back and let out a shaky breath, whispering to the empty air, "You always knew what I needed before I did." And I could almost hear her reply, soft and teasing, like the wind brushing against the curtains. Finally, as the clock on the dresser ticked toward noon, I gathered enough courage. My hands stopped trembling, though my heart did not. I picked up the note once more, and with a deep, steady breath, I began to unfold it. The paper crackled softly, the sound of years breaking apart. The ink was slightly faded but still clear enough to read. My eyes filled with tears before they even reached the words. I wasn't ready, but love doesn't wait for readiness, it demands to be felt. And in that moment, after a decade of silence, my wife spoke again. What she wrote would change the rest of my life. For the longest time, I just sat there, staring at that folded paper in my lap. My fingers rested on it, trembling lightly as though it were made of glass. The weight of it was unbearable, not in size, but in meaning. That note had survived 10 years of dust, silence, and grief. And now, it waited for me to open it. I wasn't ready. How could anyone be ready to hear from the dead, especially from the person who once made every heartbeat worth having? The clock on the nightstand ticked softly, each second feeling louder than the one before. I could hear the faint hum of cars outside, people moving through life as if the world hadn't stopped for them. But mine had stopped the moment I found that note. I wanted to read it. Yet a deeper part of me refused, because once I opened it, there would be no more what-ifs, no more wondering what she might have said if she had just one more day. I kept thinking of that night she passed, how the moonlight filtered through the curtains, how her breathing had slowed, and how I had promised her I'd keep living. But the truth was, I didn't keep that promise. I survived, yes, but I didn't live. I simply existed in the shadow she left behind. Maybe that's what scared me most about that note, the possibility that she knew it, that she had seen what I had become, even after all these years. I placed the note back on the pillow and stood up, pacing the room slowly. Every step echoed like footsteps through memory. Her picture on the dresser seemed to follow me. Her smile, gentle but knowing. I could almost hear her teasing voice, calm, patient, forgiving. I wondered if she'd written something light, maybe a little joke, or if it was something deeper. Something that would reopen every wound I'd spent years trying to close. The afternoon light shifted across the wall, landing on the photo of us at the Grand Canyon, our last trip together before her illness worsened. I remembered her hair blowing in the wind, her laughter echoing against the red rocks. We'd been so happy, that day, so full of plans. Now here I was, standing in a house full of memories but no future. That note, whatever it said, was the only thing left she had to say to me. I wasn't sure if I could survive hearing it. I sat down again, running my thumb across the edge of the paper. It was soft, worn, almost fragile like time itself. I realized I was afraid not of her words, but of what they might awaken in me. I had spent 10 years mastering silence, building walls around every ache, convincing myself that grief had settled into peace. What if her words tore those walls down? What if she'd written something that would undo the fragile balance I'd built just to survive? I held it up to my lips, breathing against the paper like it could somehow breathe back. The faint scent of lavender, her favorite perfume, still clung to it. My throat tightened. She had known I'd find it someday. She had known I wouldn't be able to look under that pillow right away. That was who she was. She always knew what I would do before I did it. She'd hidden her last message in the one place she knew I'd never disturb until the right time came. I stood and looked around the room, the sunlight touching her old vanity, the stillness that seemed to hum with her presence. I realized that the fear wasn't about death or grief. It was about love, the kind that lingers so deeply that even a decade later, it can still make you tremble like a young man. Finally, as dusk began to settle outside and the room dimmed into gold, I sat down again. My fingers found the crease of the paper and began to unfold it, slowly, like unwrapping a piece of her soul. I closed my eyes before I looked, whispering a prayer not for strength but for grace. I needed her forgiveness more than her words. When I finally opened my eyes, the ink shimmered faintly in the fading light. Her handwriting, neat, graceful, full of her, danced across the page. I inhaled sharply, every memory flooding back like a wave. And as my eyes began to move across the words, I felt my entire world tilt on its axis. 10 years of silence were about to end, and the voice I had missed for so long was about to speak again. The moment I started reading, my eyes blurred with tears so quickly that I could barely make out the first line. But her handwriting was still the same, small, elegant, curved in a way that felt alive. Every letter felt like a whisper from her. I wiped my eyes and began again, slowly, carefully. as if each word might disappear if I read too fast. The note began simply, "If you're reading this, it means you've survived your sadness. Thank you for keeping my side warm." I froze. My throat tightened. She had known somehow. She had known that I would never move her pillow, that I would keep her side untouched. Those words pierced through the decade of silence like sunlight through storm clouds. It wasn't just a message. It was proof that she had understood me better than anyone ever could. I kept reading, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it echo against the walls of that still room. "You were the best part of my life. Please forgive me for leaving first." That was the line that shattered me. I dropped the paper and pressed both hands over my face, shaking as the sobs came deep, broken, and raw. I hadn't cried like that since the day she was lowered into the ground at Arlington Cemetery, the same place where we had promised we'd rest together someday. For 10 years, I had been proud of how strong I'd stayed. But at that moment, strength was the last thing I wanted. I wanted her. I clutched the note to my chest and sank to the floor beside the bed, the tears coming harder, unstoppable. All the years of holding it in, pretending I was fine, pretending that time had healed something they collapsed in one breath. I cried for every moment. I didn't tell her I loved her enough. For every night I had slept beside an empty pillow. For every morning I had woken up, wishing I hadn't. Her words weren't long, but they carried everything. She was kind, selfless, gentle, endlessly thoughtful. I could almost see her writing it. Probably on one of those quiet afternoons when I was out buying her medicine or cooking her soup. She must have known her time was close. She must have slipped that note under my pillow while I wasn't looking, knowing I wouldn't find it until she wanted me to. The thought broke me and healed me all at once. She had planned this not out of cruelty, but out of love. She hadn't left me a goodbye. She had left me a bridge. 10 years later, and she was still guiding me toward peace. The room around me seemed to change. The light coming through the curtains no longer felt cold. It glowed softly, like a quiet blessing. I looked at her photo on the dresser. And for the first time, I didn't feel alone in the room. The grief that had weighed me down for a decade suddenly lifted just enough for me to breathe again. I sat there for hours, holding that note. My tears dried, but my hands never stopped shaking. It felt like touching her one last time. I whispered her name not in pain, but in gratitude. Because even in death, she had found a way to comfort me. Even after 25 years of marriage and 10 years of silence, she still knew how to reach me. As the sun began to set, the sky outside our window turned a soft orange, the same color it had been the evening she took her last breath. I realized that maybe this was her way of keeping her promise. She had once told me, "When I'm gone, you'll still find me. In the little things, in light, in scent, in the quiet." Now I finally understood. The note was her light. I folded it carefully and placed it back on her pillow, exactly where I had found it. Then, I lay down beside it, just as I used to lie beside her. For the first time in a decade, I felt peace instead of loneliness. The tears still came, but they were different. Soft, cleansing, the kind that leaves you lighter. That night, as I drifted into sleep, I dreamed of her standing on the porch of our old home in Savannah, Georgia, wearing the yellow dress she loved so much. She was smiling, waving, the sunset glowing behind her. She didn't say a word, but I didn't need her to. The message had already been spoken, written in her gentle hand, and sealed beneath a pillow I had guarded for 10 long years. When I woke up, the note was still there, pressed to my heart. For once, I didn't feel the ache of missing her, only the warmth of having loved her at all. After reading the note, I sat in silence, my body still trembling from the storm that had just passed through me. The house was quiet, yet it felt alive as if every corner had been holding its breath for me to find that letter. When I finally looked around, the walls, the furniture, even the old clock by the hallway, seemed to glow with memory. Every tick of that clock pulled me backward in time, piece by piece, memory by memory. The first flash that came to me was of our wedding day in San Diego, under a sky so blue it almost hurt to look at. She had worn a simple white dress, not extravagant, not adorned, but she had made it look like something heavenly. I could still hear the laughter of our friends, the way the waves crashed behind the little wooden arch, the smell of salt and sun. I remembered the way she looked up at me as we exchanged vows, her eyes reflecting every ounce of love I'd ever dreamed of receiving. Then came the memory of our first home together, a small apartment overlooking the Pacific. We didn't have much back then, just a hand-me-down couch, a leaky faucet, and each other. But we were rich in ways money could never measure. She used to cook in that tiny kitchen, humming old country tunes, dancing between the stove and the counter like the world was her ballroom. I'd watch her, sometimes from the doorway, holding a cup of coffee, smiling like a fool. It was those small, quiet moments that built the foundation of my life, not grand gestures, but simple, steady love. Another image flashed her sitting by the window during rainy afternoons, reading one of her old novels while I worked on my fishing gear. She'd look up from her book and catch me staring, then laugh and call me hopeless. I'd tell her that hopeless was fine, as long as it meant hopelessly in love. She'd blush every time, even after 20 years of marriage. That's who she was, soft, gentle, endlessly kind. I remembered the tough years too, when her health started failing. The nights at the hospital in Seattle, the sound of machines beeping. The way she'd squeeze my hand when she was too weak to speak. I'd sit beside her bed, reading to her, pretending not to notice the tears that fell when she closed her eyes. Even then, she worried about me, more than herself. "Promise me you'll keep living," she had whispered once, and I had promised. But promises are fragile things. For 10 years, I had broken that one without even realizing it. Now, sitting there with her note, every moment we'd ever shared replayed in my mind like an old film reel. The good, the bad, the beautiful, the painful, all of it merging into something far greater than either of us alone. I realized that what hurt the most wasn't losing her. It was forgetting what it meant to live for both of us. The memories kept coming, her laughter echoing through summer picnics, her hand brushing mine in grocery aisles, her quiet way of fixing every small thing that broke in my world. I could almost hear her voice again, soft and steady, reminding me to eat, to rest, to smile. She had always been the voice that balanced me, the calm that followed every storm. And even now, through a note left under a pillow, she had found a way to steady me once more. By the time the flashbacks faded, the room was dark, the only light coming from the lamp on her bedside table. I looked down at the note again, still resting in my hand, and realized that it wasn't just a message, it was a map. Every word led me back to the man I used to be. The one who found joy in simple things, who believed that love could outlast loss. She hadn't written that note to make me cry. She had written it to make me remember, and I did. Every second of the life we built together came rushing back, not as pain, but as gratitude. I whispered her name again, not out of longing, but as a thank you. Because somehow, even after all this time, she was still teaching me how to live. When the tears finally dried, I found myself sitting at the edge of the bed, still holding that fragile piece of paper as though it were made of light. The grief that had lived in me for a decade began to shift, not disappear, but loosen its grip. I looked around the room and realized how still it had been for so long. The curtains had stayed closed since the week she passed. The clock on the far wall had stopped ticking years ago. It was as if I had been living in a photograph, a frozen memory of love that once breathed. For the first time, I stood up and pulled the curtains apart. Morning light poured into the room like forgiveness. It touched her dresser, her books, the mirror where she once fixed her hair before church every Sunday. The golden hue made everything look softer, alive again. The note still trembled in my hand, but now it felt less like a wound and more like a key. She hadn't left me a goodbye, she had left me permission. I turned to her side of the bed. Her pillow, the one that had hidden the note all these years, looked different now. It wasn't a reminder of loss anymore. It was proof that love never truly ends. I placed the note gently on top of it and smiled through the ache. You were right, I whispered in my heart. I did survive my sadness. I spent that morning moving through the house like a man waking from a long dream. I opened the kitchen window, let the wind in, and brewed coffee the way she used to. 1 spoon of sugar, no cream. The smell filled the air, warm and comforting. I hadn't brewed coffee since she left. It had always felt wrong, like a betrayal. But today, it felt right. I sat by the window overlooking the small garden she had planted years ago. The roses had grown wild, climbing over the fence, untamed, but beautiful. She would have loved that. Something inside me began to shift quietly. I realized I had spent 10 years visiting her grave every Sunday in Portland, believing that was the only way to honor her. But maybe she had been here all along in this house, in the flowers, in every breath of morning air. The note had reminded me that love wasn't meant to be buried. It was meant to be lived. Later that afternoon, I walked through the house, touching the things I had avoided for years. Her piano, still polished but silent. Her old rocking chair, where she used to sit and knit scarves for the neighbors. Every item carried her presence. And instead of sadness, I felt gratitude. For the years we had. For the laughter that once echoed here. For the kind of love that could outlive the body. I went outside and stood on the porch. The air smelled like rain and lilac. It was early spring, her favorite season. I could almost hear her humming somewhere nearby, her voice soft and distant, carried by the wind. For the first time in a long while, I felt her not as a memory, but as a part of me. The note had done something no amount of time could do. It reconnected me to life. That evening, I sat at her piano and played the song we used to hum together. Can't Help Falling in Love. My fingers were rusty, but the melody came back, slow and sincere. Each note felt like a heartbeat. I closed my eyes and let the sound fill the house. I didn't imagine her sitting beside me. I didn't need to. She was already there in every chord, every vibration of air. When the song ended, I looked around and realized that the house no longer felt empty. It felt full of memory, of meaning, of love that had simply been waiting for me to wake up. I understood now that grief isn't a chain, it's a bridge. For 10 years, I had stood on one side of it, afraid to cross. But with that note, she had finally taken my hand and walked me to the other side. As the sun set beyond the oak trees, I opened the front door and let the evening air drift through. The house exhaled with me. It was time to start living again, not out of obligation, but out of love. That night, I slept with the note on my chest, feeling the steady rhythm of my heart beneath it. I dreamt of her once more, not as a ghost, but as the same woman who had left me a message of hope, trusting that I'd one day find it when I needed it most. When morning came, I didn't cry. I smiled. For the first time in 10 years, I didn't wake up missing her. I woke up grateful that I'd ever had her at all. The next morning, I woke up with a kind of calm I hadn't felt in years. The note still rested on my chest, soft against my heartbeat, like it belonged there. I looked at it again. The words no longer made me cry. They made me feel seen. I realized she hadn't written that message for the man who was broken the day she died. She had written it for the man I was meant to become after healing. For the first time, I wanted to make her proud, not mourn her. I walked into the kitchen and made coffee, the same way she liked it, 1 spoon of sugar, black, strong, and slightly bitter. I carried it outside to the porch, where the morning breeze carried the smell of wet earth and pine from the yard. I watched the sun rise over the horizon of Vermont's green hills, golden light cutting through mist, and I whispered to myself, "You kept your promise. Now I'll keep mine." That day, I found an old box, tucked in the closet, the one where she used to store letters, cards, and photographs. The box had been closed since her funeral, sealed with a ribbon I hadn't dared to untie. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside were decades of love folded into paper, birthday notes, anniversary cards, and little scraps she had written during ordinary days. I read each one slowly, feeling her voice in every word. At the bottom of the box, I placed the final note, the one I'd found under her pillow. It felt right, like completing a circle. Her words had always guided me. Now they rested with the others, where they belonged. After that, I started walking every day, not aimlessly, but purposefully. I visited the park we used to stroll through every Sunday after church. The oak tree we carved our initials into was still standing, its bark rough but alive. I placed my palm against it, remembering how her laughter once filled that space. It was then I realized, keeping her alive didn't mean holding on to sadness. It meant living in ways that honored her kindness, her patience, her light. I began doing small things she would have loved. Volunteering at the local shelter, cooking meals for the elderly, donating to the children's library she used to adore. People would ask why I showed up every morning smiling and steady. And I'd simply say, "It's a promise." They'd smile back, not knowing what that really meant. But I did. Every act of kindness was my way of saying thank you to her, over and over again. One afternoon, while sorting through the attic, I found her old diary, a small, worn book wrapped in lace. Inside were pages of her thoughts during her last years. She had written about me often. Her words weren't about pain or sickness, they were about gratitude. She wrote about the life we built, the laughter we shared, the quiet evenings on the porch watching fireflies dance over the fields. And there, near the final page, was a line that made me pause. "If I leave before him, I know he'll keep my love alive better than I could myself." I closed the book and smiled through tears. She had known me better than I knew myself. That night, I took the diary, the note, and her favorite photo, the one from our trip to Yellowstone National Park, and placed them together on the bedside table. It wasn't a shrine, it was a promise fulfilled. As the years rolled on, the ache of loss didn't disappear, but it changed shape. It became softer, like the worn edge of a stone smoothed by a river. Every morning I woke, I thanked her for another sunrise. Every night before bed, I whispered that I was doing fine, that she could rest easy wherever she was. The note had done what grief could not, it had brought me back to life. I stopped counting the years since she died and started cherishing the days I'd been given since. When neighbors asked about her, I didn't speak in past tense anymore. I said, "She's still here, just in quieter ways." I had once feared growing old without her, but now I saw that she had never really left. She was in every act of kindness I gave, every meal I shared, every person I comforted. That was how love survived, not in memories, but in motion. Sometimes, at dusk, I'd sit on the porch with a warm cup of coffee, watching the fireflies rise. The air would hum softly, the same way it did when she used to hum along to her favorite records. And in those quiet moments, I'd smile and whisper, "I kept the promise." And somewhere, I knew she was smiling too. In the weeks that followed, I felt something inside me slowly awaken, not the kind of awakening that comes with sudden joy, but the gentle kind that arrives with understanding. Every day I woke before sunrise, brewed coffee, and watched the light spill across the hills of Vermont. Just as she used to do. The mornings were quiet, yet no longer lonely. It felt as if she sat beside me, unseen but present, reminding me that love does not vanish when life ends, it simply changes shape. I started leaving the house more often. For years, I had lived like a shadow, the old man who rarely spoke, who walked through the grocery store aisles in silence, who refused to join community gatherings. But after that letter, everything changed. I began to see the world again, not as something that had taken her away from me, but as something she had left behind for me to enjoy. One Sunday, I visited the park where we used to walk after church. The same oak tree stood there, its branches wider, its trunk rougher but strong. I sat on the bench beneath it, the same one where she once tied her scarf around my neck when the wind turned cold. The memories didn't hurt anymore. They warmed me, like sunlight through leaves. I started talking to people again. The neighbors, who had grown used to my quiet nods, now saw me smile. I joined a small volunteer group that planted flowers around town. They laughed when I told them I only joined because lilies were my wife's favorite, but it was true. I wanted her name to live in every petal that bloomed. Each spring, the garden we built together became a sea of white and yellow, and people would stop to admire it. They'd ask who it was for, and I'd tell them, for someone who taught me that love outlasts everything, even goodbye. One afternoon, I found myself at the community center, watching children draw with bright crayons on big sheets of paper. A little girl came up to me and handed me a drawing of a flower. "You look like someone who needs this," she said with a shy smile. I almost laughed. It was the same flower my wife used to sketch when she was bored during long talks at the kitchen table. In that moment, I felt the universe reminding me again. She was still with me, just speaking in smaller, softer ways now. I began to travel again, too, visiting places we once dreamed of seeing but never could. I stood at the edge of the Grand Canyon, wind rushing against my face, and whispered her name into the endless space before me. In Arizona, I visited an art gallery where every painting seemed to hold a story of love and loss. I sat for hours before one, a man holding the ghost of a woman in his arms, and I realized I had become that painting. Except my ghost no longer haunted me. She guided me. When I returned home, I turned the spare room into something new. For years it had been storage boxes, dust, forgotten pieces of life. Now I cleared it all and built a reading room. I lined the shelves with her books, her journals, and a few of my own old photographs. On the wall, I hung her favorite quote: "What you love deeply becomes part of who you are." Every time I walked in, I could feel her presence, not as pain, but as purpose. Life had slowed, yes, but it had not stopped. Every evening, I brewed tea, sat by the window, and watched the stars rise. Sometimes, when the wind blew just right, I'd swear I heard her humming again, that same tune she sang while cooking, soft and tender. I'd close my eyes and hum along. It no longer hurt to remember. It healed me. I realized then that grief had never been my enemy. It was my teacher. It showed me that love isn't measured by how long someone stays, but by how deeply they leave their mark. My wife's note hadn't just given me closure. It had given me a reason to live again. To give. To laugh. To breathe without guilt. Now, every time I plant a flower, smile at a stranger, or help someone in need, I think of her. I like to believe that somewhere she sees it all, that her note reached me not to end a story, but to begin a new chapter. And in that chapter, I am no longer a man waiting for the past to return. I am a man living with the gift she left behind, a love strong enough to bloom again. Now, in the quiet of my twilight years, I often sit on the porch with a blanket across my knees and think about everything that's happened. The wind moves gently through the trees, the same way it used to lift her hair when she laughed. Life has slowed to a peaceful rhythm, and that's when I realize grief never truly leaves us. It just learns to live beside us. When I look back, I see not the years I lost to pain, but the years she gave me through her love. Her note, written in her fragile hand, became more than words. It was a bridge, one that carried me from sorrow to peace. For 10 years, I had lived like a ghost inside my own life. But that one small letter, hidden under my pillow, gave me breath again. I sometimes wonder why she hid it there. Maybe she knew I wouldn't have survived reading it too soon. Maybe she wanted me to find it when I was strong enough to live again. The timing was no accident. It was her final act of care. Even after death, she had been watching over me, waiting until I could open that envelope without breaking completely. That thought alone fills me with gratitude deeper than words. People often say, time heals all wounds. I don't believe that. Time doesn't heal. Love does. And the kind of love she left me was the kind that kept growing even after her last breath. It's in every sunrise I watch now, every flower I plant, every stranger I smile at. Love, when true, becomes a part of the world around you. It never fades. It just changes its shape. There are days when I still miss her voice, that soft tone that could calm any storm in me. On those days, I sit by the window, hold her framed note, and read it again slowly. Thank you for keeping my side warm. 10 simple words, yet they hold a lifetime inside them. They remind me that love is not about possession, it's about presence. She's still here. In the warmth of the sunlight, in the rustle of the wind through the curtains, in every small kindness that passes between people. I've stopped visiting the cemetery as often, not because I've forgotten her, but because I've learned she's not there. She's everywhere else, in the laughter of children at the park, in the scent of lilies after the rain, in the gentle hush of the world before dawn. I don't talk to her stone anymore. I talk to her in the living things she loved. And somehow, that feels more real. Sometimes, younger people ask me how I managed to live through such loss. I tell them the truth: I didn't. Not at first. I survived. There's a difference. But survival, when given time, becomes living again. It takes years, maybe decades. But eventually, love finds a way to reach you, even through death, even through silence. When I close my eyes, I often see her standing in the sunlight, smiling that same gentle smile she gave me the day we first met. I imagine her whispering, "You did well, and that's enough." That's all I ever needed to know. She'd be proud of how I kept going, how I chose kindness over bitterness, how I found beauty again in a world that once felt so empty. Now, every night before I sleep, I touch the frame that holds her note and say goodnight. Not out of habit, but out of gratitude. She gave me one last message, and I turned it into a lifetime of meaning. If there's one thing I've learned from all this, it's that love doesn't die when a person does. It lingers, reshapes, waits for you to notice it again. It's in the stranger who smiles when you're lonely, the bird that lands near your window, the note you weren't ready to read until the right moment. So when people ask if I still miss her, I tell them the truth. I don't miss her. I carry her. She's in everything I do, every sunrise, every quiet moment, every breath I take. Her note didn't end our story. It kept it alive. Final thought. She left a note under my pillow, not to say goodbye, but to remind me that love never really leaves. It just waits until you're ready to see it again.